real estate sales as an entry level world to a giant world. And while there are some people that are just dynamite and they're great at real estate sale, the fact is that everything's always changing. And some people get into real estate and then look and see, become successful in selling and say, you know what, there's a little bit more. Maybe I can do this, and then sometimes circumstances push them that way, like a recession, like COVID, right? Like any number of things. But it's not about getting out of the industry. It's about augmenting what you do, learning more about your chosen industry, maybe in another field. Maybe you come back over time, but you have to be flexible. I think that's one of the things we came up with. That was really one of the keys, huh?
Zach, what do I do when a video goes viral? How do I milk that for all it's worth?
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. We're missing a person. We're missing Keri, but we've got Mike Bernier, Saul Klein, myself. Thank you for joining us. We want to do this weekly as the market shifts into a more neutral market as of right now. But let's talk. Mike, you've got a recap for us as what we talked about a little bit last week?
Yeah, so last week we jumped on and we kind of talked about the shifting market, some of the anxiety and fears, even misinformation around the shifting market, agents and the reactions to the shifting market, some good, some bad opportunities that we may see in the shifting market. I think we had a really good conversation going through some data, some data points, some metrics. So, to me, I left that conversation feeling really, really inspired by what's to come, not negative, but really inspired by what's to come because I saw opportunity. Saul, what do you have to say?
Yeah, no, right on. Exactly. That's what we were talking about. The opportunity that comes from this. And we've been looking at this now for a week since the last time we looked. And so it's like, well, where are we on those? Do we still feel the same way? I think because one of the questions that we get, and I know that the people who are members of this group get, is from their clients is, should I buy now? Mm-hmm. And so there's all this, we're talking about all this different type of information. And I would say that there's not that much different last week from this week. This all takes place over time. None of this stuff unfolds immediately. And so do we still have inflation? Yeah. Do we still have high interest rates? Yeah. Do people still need to buy and sell? Yeah. Are some people priced out of the market? Yeah. Are we going to end up with more inventory? Yeah. Are we still underbuilt? Yeah. All that stuff is still there. And while I saw a projection that instead of like 5.5 million units this in 2021, this year it'll be 5.3, so it'll be a little bit less. But right now, there's still the opportunity to sell. And that's what we were talking about. And then the opportunities that come because we know government land use policy is changing. We know that funding is coming down for new transportation. We know that transportation affects land use specifically. So there are these opportunities out there to look for. And one of the things we didn't talk about, but I always and it's kind of heresy maybe to say this, but I always looked at real estate sales as an entry level world to a giant world. And while there are some people that are just dynamite and they're great at real estate sale, the fact is that everything's always changing. And some people get into real estate and then look and see, become successful in selling and say, you know what, there's a little bit more. Maybe I can do this. And then sometimes circumstances push them that way, like a recession, like COVID, right? Like any number of things. But it's not about getting out of the industry. It's about augmenting what you do, learning more about your chosen industry, maybe in another field. Maybe you come back over time, but you have to be flexible. I think that's one of the things we came up with. That was really one of the keys, huh?
Yeah, I'll tell you on my own personal story, when you talk about, and something you just said triggered this for me. So when you're saying that things don't change on a dime, we went from, it usually doesn't work that way. But if you look back in 2008, when people are still under this assumption that we are going to have this massive crash and it's all going to come crashing down, when 2008 hit, the inventory ramped up very much on a dime. That was one of the only times that it really did. It happened so fast. So that's one of the indicators to me when you're seeing a shift. This isn't something that's changing overnight. We're not talking about overnight massive changes. We're talking about a shift. Yes, some buyers have gone away. Affordability has affected people. There's some things that have changed, but we're not talking massive change here. what I do remember about, 2008, the last big shift that we saw was that, for me as an agent, the way I conducted business prior to 2008 no longer worked. So I got into 2008, actually 2007, even 2006, into 2006 and 2007. And the things I was used to doing, making me successful, no longer were working. And I do think that a lot of agents right now, from who I'm talking to, are kind of experiencing that too. I'm seeing it all over the chat rooms. I'm talking to agents. They're going, nothing's working. I'm not successful. I'm trying this and it's not working. I'm trying that. It's not working. It always worked before. So that's one of the things I want to focus on throughout these webinars too, or these things we're doing too, is what should agents do to shift with the market? What kind of changes do we need to do in the way we build a pipeline? What kind of changes do we need to do in our communications towards our interested clients? What needs to change? Because when I got steamrolled by the last major shift, it took me a year to figure that out.
Yeah.
I want to help people do that faster.
Well, so, I recall the last major shift. I was CEO of a technology company and my customers were realtors.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that shift took place and we started seeing less revenue and a shakeout in the marketplace, that affected that company dramatically. We were able to do other things to maintain and keep the data conversation alive. But I'm going to go back to my previous well, let me finish with this one. I think this is really important. A lot of people don't know this, but in 2008, we almost collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
The economy almost collapsed. The things that were done were extraordinary. They were not run of the mill. They call it today, you have no idea. They call it quantitative easing. That means the Fed just pumped and pumped and pumped. Mm-hmm. And they inflate. What happens if all this extra capital, the value of things, because more people have more money, they're going to pay more for it, and the price goes up. So you had all this money and they saved the banks, they saved JP Morgan, they saved all of the major institutions, Wall Street, they saved General Motors. People don't remember that they saved these major industry by pumping. They never took it out. And so quantitative easing created a false valuation in most assets. And then, so that's okay, they had plans to take it out, but they had all that money in there, and with all that increase, it led to inflation. Too much money chasing too few goods. So now we end up with inflation. Well, what they did last time and we're sliding into a recession. Well, it's typically how you curb inflation is you increase interest rates, but we can't really do that at this time. And the other piece is that the Fed still wants to take quantitative, you see this QT now, that's quantitative tightening. And so the combination of taking changing the balance sheet of the Fed and this interest rate ratchet to fight inflation is going to have an effect. And it always does. And this time, though, there's not as much room for the Fed to maneuver. And that's why I have doubts about certain things. There's just, but I don't see the end of the world. I see opportunity, but I can tell you that I'm realistic about this. And I see people using numbers to come up with the valuations, and the numbers they use are skewed. And so can you imagine people trying to make informed decisions, look at the consumer price index, look at, different, knowing that they're coming from different sources and there might be some error, and then combining it to come up with a speculation as to where the market might go. So people that sell real estate just have to pay attention locally, nationally, internationally, but locally. Watch what's going on in your market. But the recession of the 1980s was a recession which, to me, situationally is very similar to today. I was a real estate broker. I had about 20 agents working for me. There was a consolidation of the industry. Sears bought Coldwell Banker. Merrill Lynch got into real estate. Prudential got into real estate. And so the idea was a one-stop shop. Sounds familiar, right? And so and so I was a broker and I could see all this money. Century 21 got purchased by Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. And so I thought, geez, I got to compete. It's a recession. All these guys are coming together. How do I compete? And my decision in my practice at that time was to expand my business. And so I found other ways to earn money from my real estate client base. And so I started to do things. I started to get licensed in complementary areas. I got a Series 7, which is a general securities license, a Series 24, Series 63 security license, hung my securities licenses with a broker dealer so that when I sold people, because people trusted me, I could sell them a house. Well, if I could sell them a house, there are other things, bigger picture in their life. And so then I thought, everybody I talk to, I'd like to do business with, but they don't need to buy a house. But everybody I talk to probably needs somebody to do their taxes. So I learned how to do taxes. And so the taxes, and I created a tax practice. And I did about 400 tax returns a year for years.
Damn, man.
With those, and then, by the end of tax season, I had could take it easy if I wanted to, but I had people would say, well, so how do I reduce? Back in those days, real estate was a tax shelter, right? And I would say to people, they'd say, oh, I hate paying taxes. How do I reduce my taxes? And I'd say, you buy real estate. Oh, who do I go to buy real estate? Well, we'll set an appointment right now for June and we'll take you out and we'll look at apartment buildings. We'll look at property. So the tax business set up, right? And then I sold security. They said, can I put money in my IRA? I thought, yeah, who will do that? I can do that for you. So I became a certified financial planner. So I opened up that customer base, and we had a property management division. So we were looking for revenue streams that were complementary. And I see kind of the same thing. I see people asking, and well, there are things that you could look at doing that might be complementary, and it might be permanent, and it might be temporary, because the economy is temporary, right? It's cyclical.
I love what you're saying. That as a real estate broker, Saul, that's what I've been doing for years, looking at ancillary income. As real estate brokers, you mentioned the consolidations that were going on and the roll-ups and M&As that were going on in the 80s with, all the large corporations, because they thought about, well, how do I have a one-stop shop, an ecosystem, ancillary income? I mean, if there's X amount of dollars per real estate transaction that happens, I'm only getting, the bottom 10% on the commission splits. How do we get the insurance income and the mortgage income and the title income? It's a smart way to think of things, but we only think of that in terms of large corporations. We don't think of it as what can agents do to create their own ancillary opportunity.
Or teams or small brokerages, right? There's a way to compete.
There is. Absolutely. I love that angle. So, you said that this recession is starting to look a lot like the one in the 1980s. It's funny you said that, because now the big topic out there, incidentally, when you're looking at organizations like T360, they've got their big conferences. I think Gathering the Eagles just happened. The big conferences, that's where you're getting a lot of large CEOs, large corporations hanging out there. That's the big topic right now. Big roll-ups, big consolidations within the real estate industry.
That's exactly what happened in the 80s. It was the same thing.
Yep.
Right? And so what we look for were niches, right? Mm-hmm. And if you could find, and I can tell you, I had a real estate partner, and for 20 years, we sold real estate, owned a real estate company together, had an office full of agents, and he spoke Spanish fluently. And he was like almost my dad's age, but we teamed up when we first started selling real estate actively, and he spoke Spanish, and we developed, it's kind of an interesting story, but we developed a clientele of people from Mexico when the peso was collapsing in the 80s because of all the turmoil, and it was all legal. You could take so much money out of the country, and people wanted to put their money into, dollar assets, and that's real estate. And so they were buying San Diego, buying in Coronado, and buying in La Jolla, all cash deals. We were doing 2 or 3 a weekend. And it came from a trust that we had built by selling a lady a couple of properties. And over time, it built into a relationship. She introduced us to her clients. But that happened when there was opportunity. There was money fleeing countries, right? And we just happened to be there when money was fleeing. And the trust was built because my partner spoke Spanish.
I love that. Thinking back again to 2008 when that crashed, and I was saying that I kind of got cannibalized by the market. The things that I was doing no longer worked. What eventually I developed was new ways to do business. And I was looking at things like niches. I developed several niches. I think a lot of real estate agents get so tied into one way to build a pipeline or one way to conduct business. When that gets compromised, they don't know what to do. And that's exactly what I'm feeling with agents right now. They're like, the phone was ringing, or houses were selling themselves. I put it on the market. It was gone in 2 minutes, and I was online bragging about the $80,000 over asking price I got the house, and it sold in 2 minutes. And now I can't do that no more. What do I do? It's like they've atrophied and lost a skill set that they had, 3, 4, or 5 years ago that was really successful. They've atrophied and lost the skill sets to generate new leads, to generate new opportunity, different niches that they could explore. It all changed on them, and now it's changing back, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. And so think about this, that leads are better if they're qualified in some way. Mm-hmm. And so, there are other ways to get leads. Maybe people need to look at their lead, the way they're getting leads. And for me, the best way to get leads was to teach people things.
Mhm.
Right? And I was always of the opinion that an informed consumer was a better consumer. And I taught all my agents that, right? If we can teach people, and what do we teach them? Let's teach them about the real estate transaction because nobody else has done that. Let's go over the contract paragraph by paragraph and explain things that nobody else explains. Why? Because it demonstrates expertise. And what does that do? That builds trust and confidence. And so there's all of these things you can hone your skills as well, right? If things get slowed. Understanding that this real estate, being in real estate, in my mind, you're truly an entrepreneur. From one day to another. People sometimes get in these conversations, who's an innovator, what's an entrepreneur, and what's an independent contractor? How do we classify people? But I think people that are in real estate and can change revenue streams within their business from one to another based on what's taking place in the marketplace, those are really entrepreneurs.
And you also touch on this too. There's people that, are self-employed conducting business. There's people that are actually running a business. And, when you really look at running a business, and you're building systems around all of it. And, maybe perhaps you've got to shift out of, relying so heavily on your SOI, if that's what you're doing. And maybe you got to get back really again to lead generating your own listings. Maybe you got to go back and start doing a lot of open houses again. Maybe you're putting together some great marketing campaigns and geofarming or circle prospecting, because these are things that people probably got away from for a while. And it's time to maybe go back to that. It's interesting though, because when you're talking about chasing revenue streams, there's in some states do it, some do not, but some people originate mortgages and they sell real estate. You can do more than one thing. And you can chase different niches in ways to originate business in real estate. If you're only going to do real estate, there's multiple ways that you could do it. Niches, investors, of course, distressed property. There's not a lot of that going on right now. There's first-time home buyers, which by the way, I think have a great shot right now, even though the affordability is way out of whack. I'm seeing first-time home buyers actually being successful to get contracts accepted right now because there's less competition. So the person that was losing every single offer is starting to win right now. So identifying where the opportunity is and where the conversation is. You mentioned that, a consumed informer is how'd you say it? A consumed informer, informed consumer is a better consumer, right? So I love that too. And I'm seeing very little of the real estate community educating consumers. I see it once in a while, like little tiny micro topics that they could just go out, throw a TikTok video together, something on Facebook, little educational nuggets that separates them apart. And I think too, sellers, when the market changes, look for local area experts. They look for hyper local, they look for market experts, and we don't always demonstrate that. Showing a sold sign or somebody with a sold sign at a closing table is not necessarily demonstrating your market expertise. So I think those are some of the shifts that agents need to really figure out.
You know what? We used to put our byline. So when I had owned a real estate company, it was the name of the company and then the byline, right? And so the name of the company and the byline was a real estate services and education company. That was the byline. That's what every card said of every agent, right? A real estate services and education company, because it was a differentiator. Nobody else in real estate said they did that. And that's what we tried to do. And it built trust and confidence. And we had this client for life thing. That's like a true thing, right? I mean, you can have clients over and over and over again. And it depends on the value that they see from you. And then if they trust you, then they ask you, they come back. Another thing I see agents say every once in a while, I kind of throw a question out there, you guys, that's kind of like, it's just informative. And I don't mean anything but to throw it out there and to see what people really think. And I'll get answers like, well, I don't ever answer a question like that because that's not in my lane. I don't want to get out of my lane. And I'm thinking, how's the economy? Telling somebody what you think is going on in the economy is not getting out of your lane. That's right in the middle of your lane. And so we're not saying that you're going to tell people specific. I'm going to talk to you generally about taxation. I'm not going to say to you, here's a 1031 tax deferred exchange. Here's the deferred revenue. Here's the recognized revenue. Here's the tax consequence to you. No, that's right. No, but can we talk about things like deferring of capital gain on the sale of a property? Can we talk about the benefits of, openly to clients about owning investment property and the benefits that it brings and the difference between passive income and active income? And it sounds tedious, but if you want to sell real estate in different kinds of that's another thing. You sell houses, but you could sell condos. Yeah, but you could sell shopping centers. Oh, but I don't have the expertise. Learn it. Right. Put that in your pipeline, in your learning pipeline, right? Doesn't mean you got to do it tomorrow, but there's things that people should be working on within this industry, I think, to continue to move. Real estate sales is great, but it can take you so much further as you look at all the opportunities.
And I think what you said too, even at a starter point, very much a starting point. And I did this early in my career. I started so young. I was 21 years old when I started. So I had to ask myself, well, what am I going to do to stand out against all these, older, more well-polished, experienced people. So I figured out very early on that there's so many holes in what agents were good at. They were terrible, in at least my market, terrible at explaining mortgages. They knew almost nothing about it because they always said, well, that's a lender's job. Let them figure it out. I learned mortgages at a really high level at a very young age. And I was able to talk to people before they ever even talked to a lender about mortgage concepts that they're going, wait, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. If you know what you're talking about, I'm gonna hold on to you. I did the same thing in terms of construction. We were doing a lot of flips back after 2008. I learned everything I could about construction, renovation. I could practically walk into a place and bid it, what it's going to be within a small margin of error of what the cost of repair is going to be. Well,
so it's about trust. It's a real small thing, but trust, demonstrating expertise. That's what you're doing. Yep. Demonstrating expertise builds trust and confidence. If you expect somebody to sign a contract to buy the biggest investment of their life, you better have their trust and confidence. And so you figured out a way to gain that in a way that was beneficial to them as well as being beneficial to you.
And I do think that's going to apply a lot right now, because again, we're talking about the misinformation and just flat out wrong information that's going on right now. Some of the doom and gloom. Having a great trust base inside of your own relationships, inside of your own context, that you're the person they go to for whatever it is, because they trust what you say, you deliver, it's accurate. This is a great time to go out and really start educating people, because all the misinformation, it's rampant. Nobody knows what's really going on. They're hearing all kinds of crazy things, and they don't have a trusted person that they're really listening to.
Well, so here's two things I think that people could maybe focus on. Easy things. One is, if you look at the offer to purchase or the contract or whatever you call it in your state, usually there's things that are hard to explain to people, like liquidated damage provisions and mandated arbitration or whatever the case may be. So I know there are a lot of agents that don't bother to explain that in detail. Just those things, just adding to your repertoire, greater understanding of some of those more complex parts of the contract is going to differentiate you. Something else, agency and representation. Know and understand and be able to talk to people about the different. Now, we know there's agency disclosure requirements, but use that to your advantage. Explain the benefits of representation, if in fact you believe that, when you're talking to a prospective buyer. And what that'll do is demonstrate that expertise. And that's what you're trying to find, these little things that will indicate you. Another way to build trust and confidence is make a promise and keep it. Make a promise and keep it. Tell them you be there at 5, be there at 5. Right? Tell them you're going to call them. Just make a promise. But if you're conscious of these things all the time over your working career, it'll become second nature. And everything you do will kind of lead back to you building your sphere of influence tighter and tighter and tighter, because you're engaging.
And I think I want to point this out too, Saul. I think this is important, that, when you're looking at this, traditionally has always been that 75-25 rule, that 75% of the business kind of goes to the top 25 of the industry and the rest fight over the scraps. I think that number is actually getting worse. I think there's more of the weaker agents out there are just kind of falling off. And because it's more complex, because the public is more confused by what's going on, they're looking at stronger agents for more guidance. I think the stronger agents are picking up more business right now, not less. That's where the opportunity is. The more you dial your stuff in, the more business you're going to attract. Even in a declining market where there's less transactions available, I'm watching people do more. And on top of that, if you really look at the NAR numbers, for a while now, NAR, their roster was like 29 to 30 something percent. It was all agents that are less than 2 years in the business. A lot of that's starting to fall off. There's attrition now. So those inexperienced agents, you want to talk about competition, Open Door, Zillow, that was never really your competition. It's all brand new agents that are taking 3 or 4 deals from their friends and family. Then they just quit and get out of the business. That was like 30% of the roster.
And that's the way it's always been, though. I mean, that's what brokers, that's a big problem, is brokers bring anybody in, give them a desk.
But we're starting to see the attrition. They're starting to leave the business, which is leaving more opportunity for the stronger agents that can do what we're talking about, that can educate, that can show a differential, that stand out a little bit differently than other agents. They're going to do more business, not less.
Well, and no doubt. So here, bottom line is, contact with people creates opportunity. Contacts create contracts.
Yep.
Contacts create contracts.
Well, so let's get specific on that. What type of contacts in the current market that we're in and heading into creates contracts?
So you have to remember that a contract happens along a timeline. And so you have to have this timeline to get people to the end, to the actual contract itself. So it begins with filling the pipeline. Where do you start? And then you work your way down. So I used to say things as simple as, I use my own domain in my email. right? Or the name of my company, but I use Saul Klein. My email address, saul@saulklein.com. Every time I'd send an email, people would see my name. And I'd have a reason, and it would be in my email address, and it'd be in the bottom, and that's a contact, and that's an engagement. And so look to the depth of the engagements that you have now and reach out and touch people, because it's all about contact right now. Tristan, you may ask an interesting question. There actually are some methodologies today where people think they can say in a neighborhood, what's the probability of certain people selling their house, right? And I've seen some of these models work to a degree. So if I had access to something like that, that would be ideal, right? If there was an 80% chance that someone was willing to list or sell, then those contacts would be more valuable than a contact that came in off of a lead I bought from realtor.com.
So you're talking predictive analytics. We're using a system that's really good. It's accurate up to about 35%. So if your average person, if you just took, 1,000 people, what's the turnover rate? 7-8% of those 1,000 will move in the year. If you can ramp that up to 35% accuracy,
Right, exactly.
It makes you more efficient. Right. But here's what I'm going to say to that, Tristan. I always say that real estate's a contact sport. One, because it's rough and tumble and it hurts a little bit, but also because you can't really do it unless you're picking the phone up and making contacts. And I challenge everybody watching this to do one thing only. Make 5 phone calls a day, 5 conversations per day, per working day, not even weekends or holidays. That's over 1,300 conversations you're going to have that are quality conversations in a year. And I challenge anybody to sell less real estate than more by talking to 1,300 people in a year.
Now you're going back to something Tristan talks about all the time, and that's like planning. It's like you have to be committed, and you're going to make 5 calls a day, and you're going to sit down and you're planning in the morning or wherever you do it, and you're going to outline that, and you're going to force yourself to do it. And then that takes a discipline, right? And you hold yourself accountable. But you're absolutely right. Contact with people creates opportunity. Contacts create contracts. The more you do that.
And so that's what I'm saying is this is what it's going to go back to now. These foundational, non-sexy, boring things of real estate, that's going to make you successful. It's not a rampant market or a frenzy of buyers. That's not what's going to do it right now. It's going back to the foundational things that we kind of forgot how to do. So, that 5 contacts a day, when you really think about it, we're talking about that could be over inside of like 15, 20 minutes. You're done for the day. And if you do that, 1,300 calls a year or conversations a year about real estate, how many more transactions will you do? 15, 20, 30, 40? I mean, look at the GCI attached to that. When you talk about KPIs, key performance indicators, some of those things you have to look at is how many calls do I need to make to get a quality conversation? How many quality conversations do I get an actual contract? How many contracts to closings? You reverse engineer that and you realize that it's really just a math game like that.
Then we used to call it suspects, prospects, customers, or clients, right? Suspects, and the better you get at figuring that's another thing, is that all leads are not created equal. All leads are not worth the same. There's a difference between a lead and a referral, right? There's a number of right, and people don't know this, particularly if they're newer to the business, right? And they've only seen this current way of doing business. This is a fault. The last 10 years is false. Right? There's been an overabundance of capital in the marketplace. It's going to shift back to normal situations when there were still lots of realtors. There's still lots of real estate being listed and sold. Now, there are other issues that we're going to have to deal with, and we will deal with, like institutions buying real estate. Yeah, that's there. That'll stay. That doesn't mean it's bad or good or whatever, but it's part of the environment now. Right? There are the prices, the escalation, there's housing affordability. There's the fact that land use policy in this country is going to change dramatically in the next 5 years. The policy and the money is already there to do it. It's already been allocated. So the transportation is going to change dramatically. I mean, have you woken up, Tristan, maybe where you live, do you wake up in the morning and there's a bike lane in front of your house? So this has been happening here in San Diego. People wake up and they say, what? Because the cities get paid more money for bike lanes because they want less driving. Less driving is better for the environment. I get it. I can go for that. Walkability, building more dense, giving density bonuses close to transportation hubs. There's actually halo effects on properties in those types of areas across the country. And we get into this data analytics and looking at what's available. And if I were selling real estate today, particularly in California, where we've got SB 9 and 10, where basically they've upzoned everything, Tristan. They've upzoned it. And so now I got a house, I can build a unit on the back or more. Everybody can do that. Why? Because now there's less cost of land per unit, more affordability. lots of things are going to happen here in the next couple of years that are going to also force the industry in a particular direction. And then the one thing we haven't mentioned, we don't want to talk about it now, is all this litigation, right? And there's specific cases that could have a major impact on what's going on. And it's not like it's gloom and doom. It's not like it's going to happen. It's like, this is what's out there right now, and you need to be aware of it.
100%. So Tristan, do we have time, or we still got more time, or what?
We got a minute if you want to wrap up.
Well, yeah. The one thing I wanted to state was, and I hope everybody can kind of take this away from what we're talking about, that just because something changes doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or bad. You have to remain a little neutral. You have to be able to walk into it unemotionally and look for the opportunity. If you're married to the way you've been doing business and it's the only way you know how to, it's going to be a problem. The ability to flex, to shift, to change quickly is going to be, the difference between success and failure in any shifting market. And I'll tell you, though, you're going to find that people will adapt to it. But if you're on the latter end of that with everybody else, at 98% that'll shift last, you're going to be in the herd like everybody else, like a sea of sameness. If you start shifting now before everybody, you got such a leg up, on what you can do and accomplish before everybody gets there. That's the advice I want to give.
Dude, great advice. Great advice. All right. So next week, I've got some things that I want to talk to you guys about as far as unemployment. And I wrote these down. Unemployment. I want to talk about rental properties, short-term rentals, long-term rentals, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about these companies that now are not investing as much because the market has turned a little bit, and new construction, because new construction is very regional. And I get the media saying that they throw out the word new construction. And where I live in the whole freaking county, there's no new construction.
Correct.
So it doesn't even affect us. So I want to talk about new construction as well.
Yeah, actually, there's something, I'll send it to you, Tristan. It's called Up for Growth. And it's actually a plan put together by a think tank that says we're 4 million units short. And so we talk about it all the time, but nobody's put a plan together to do anything about it. And so they're launching July 14th. I've seen all the slides on this. And I said, well, okay, they've actually gone through and said, how many units are there? How many are uninhabitable, right? And they've calculated how many units. Okay, how are we going to do this? And we've got to deal with the yuppies and right. There's lots of, not the NIMBYs, and right. There's a lot of conversation, but I think that it's really important. So yeah, new construction is a key piece to this because we're short.
So I do think too, Saul, the last thing I want to leave and part with everybody is when you're talking about demand and shortages of supply, and especially new construction, it's not just new construction. We're talking shortages in housing, period. So when you're looking at whether or not this is a market bust, there's still millions of buyers out there that are ready, able, and willing that if they could find the right house, they would buy it right now. That's something we can't forget. People are more price conscious. They're a little sketchy right now. Things are changing and they're uncomfortable. They're being more cautious, but there's still excessive demand, even in this market. That's something I think people forget.
Yeah, I love that. All right, guys, I love this. And next week we'll have Keri back, so it'll be a good mix there as well. I like
All right,
it.
see you, gentlemen.
Great to see you guys.
Thanks, guys. Great talk.
Bye.